Retired teacher found dying cat on lonely hike. Their bond was unbreakable until the inevitable. Arthur Thomas, 70 years weathered but still sturdy, considered the vast, silent expanse of the Utah desert his truest confidant. Decades spent teaching history in bustling classrooms had given way to a retirement defined by quietude and the rhythmic crunch of his boots on sandstone trails. His small, unassuming house sat on the edge of a town that felt like a mere punctuation mark against the sprawling sentences of the Red Rock valleys. Here, surrounded by geological time, his own felt both fleeting and infinite. His routine was etched by the sun. Before its rays fully crested the jagged horizon, painting the cliffs in hues of fire and rose, Arthur would be awake. A simple breakfast, the careful filling of his canteen, the preparation of a sandwich, usually turkey and Swiss on rye, and he was out the door. His companion was the silence, broken only by the wind whistling through canyons, the scuttle of unseen lizards, or the cry of a distant hawk. He'd taught generations about the grand sweep of human endeavors, the rise and fall of empires, but out here, history felt different. It was etched in the layers of rock, in the tenacity of the sparse vegetation, in the immense, enduring quiet. He walked not for speed or conquest, but for immersion. He knew the trails intimately, the ones marked on park maps, and the fainter whispers trod only by deer or the hopeful prospectors of bygone eras. He'd learned to read the subtle language of the desert, the way a bent twig might indicate the path of a mule deer, the type of scat left by a coyote, the hopeful green of a plant signaling hidden moisture. He carried water, a simple lunch, a wide-brimmed hat, and the weight of memory, lightened somewhat by the grandeur surrounding him. His wife, Eleanor, had loved the desert's stark beauty too, though she'd preferred viewing it from the car or the porch. Her absence, 5 years now, was a constant quiet ache, dulled but never erased by the landscape's indifference. One particular morning, the air held a crystalline clarity that promised warmth later, but was cool and sharp in the pre-dawn light. Arthur chose a less frequented path, one that wound deeper into a network of smaller canyons, where the sandstone formations took on more whimsical, sculpted shapes. He felt a familiar sense of peace settle over him as he walked, his breathing syncing with his measured steps. The rising sun cast long, dramatic shadows, turning the familiar terrain into something mysterious and new. He paused often, not from fatigue, but to simply observe the way the light caught the edge of a cliff, the intricate patterns of erosion, the determined stance of a solitary Utah juniper. He was perhaps 2 miles from his starting point, navigating a sandy wash flanking a cluster of hardy desert shrubs, creosote bushes releasing their unique, rain-like scent into the dry air, and a few stubborn, prickly pear cacti. It was then that a small patch of color, incongruous against the muted earth tones, caught his eye. Near the base of a larger creosote, something orange lay unnervingly still. Arthur approached cautiously. His first thought was perhaps a discarded piece of cloth snagged by the branches. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a cat, a small ginger cat, curled tightly, its fur matted with dust and clinging sand. It was so still he initially feared it was already dead. He crouched down, his knees protesting mildly. He listened intently, a faint, shallow rise and fall of its flank. It was breathing, but barely. Its fur, where not obscured by grime, was the color of apricot jam, but it felt dry and brittle beneath his tentative touch. The creature was painfully thin. He could feel the sharp ridges of its spine and ribs. Its eyes were squeezed shut, crusted at the corners. Tiny, shallow prints in the sand nearby suggested a desperate, stumbling journey before collapsing here. How long had it been? Days, certainly. How had it even gotten this far out? Lost? Abandoned? The desert was merciless to the unprepared, let alone a small domestic animal. Compassion, immediate and instinctive, surged through Arthur. He murmured softly, "Hey there, little fellow. You're in a bad way, aren't you?" Without hesitation, he unscrewed the cap of his canteen. He cradled the cat's head with an infinite gentleness, using his finger to slightly part its dry lips. He let a few drops of precious water trickle onto its tongue. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of the tongue responded. It was the faintest sign of life, but it was enough. He gave it a few more drops, careful not to overwhelm it. The cat felt impossibly light in his hands, a fragile bundle of fading warmth. Leaving it here was unthinkable. The sun was climbing higher, its heat already beginning to radiate from the rocks. It wouldn't survive the day. Arthur looked around. He was miles from home. He carefully rearranged the contents of his worn canvas backpack, sandwich, first aid kit, birding guide, creating a small cushioned space. Gently, he lifted the cat, supporting its limp body, and settled it into the makeshift nest. It barely stirred, emitting only the faintest wheezing sigh. He zipped the backpack partially, leaving enough opening for air, and hoisted it onto his back. The slight weight was a tangible reminder of his new, urgent purpose. He turned back the way he came, his usual leisurely pace abandoned for a quicker, more determined stride. The silence of the desert no longer felt peaceful. It felt precarious, amplifying the fragility of the life he carried. He glanced back occasionally, ensuring the cat wasn't jostled too much. He found himself talking to it, soft reassurances carried away by the breeze. "Hang in there, little one. We'll get you home. We'll get you safe." The walk back seemed longer than the journey out. The sun beat down and sweat trickled down his temples. He rationed his remaining water, mindful of his own needs, but more concerned about the creature entrusted to his care. Each step felt significant. He, who usually sought solitude, was now responsible for another life, plucked unexpectedly from the harsh indifference of the wild. Finally, his small house came into view, shimmering slightly in the heat haze. Relief washed over him. He hurried inside, the cool dimness a welcome respite. He carefully slid the backpack off and gently lifted the cat out. It seemed even weaker now, utterly passive. He laid it carefully on an old, soft towel in the cool, tiled floor of the kitchen. He fetched a shallow dish and filled it with fresh water, placing it near the cat's nose. He then soaked a corner of a clean cloth in warm water and began, with painstaking gentleness, to wipe away the layers of dust and grime from its face and fur. The cat remained limp, its eyes still closed. Arthur's heart clenched. Had he been too late? He remembered Eleanor nursing a sick blue jay back to health years ago. She'd used an eyedropper. He found one in the back of a kitchen drawer, rinsed it thoroughly, and filled it with water. Gently prying the cat's mouth open just enough, he squeezed a few drops in. Again, that faint flicker of the tongue. Hope rekindled. He moistened some dry cat food he kept for the occasional stray visitor with warm water, mashing it into a thin gruel. He dipped his finger in and offered it to the cat's lips. There was no response. He sat with the cat for a long time, periodically offering water with the dropper and gently cleaning its fur. He spoke to it in low, soothing tones, telling it about his house, about the porch where the sun lingered in the afternoon, about the quiet life he led. As the day wore on, he noticed a subtle change. The breathing, while still shallow, seemed a fraction less ragged. When he gently stroked its side, he thought he felt the faintest vibration, too weak to be a purr, but perhaps a nascent response. He prepared a makeshift bed, a cardboard box lined with old soft towels, and placed it in a quiet corner of his living room, away from drafts. He carefully transferred the cat to the box, placing the water dish nearby. He sat in his worn armchair, watching the box, his usual evening routine of reading forgotten. The silence of the house felt different tonight, filled with a fragile presence, a quiet anticipation. He drifted off to sleep in the chair, waking intermittently to check on his patient. Sometime during the night, he thought he saw its eyes flutter open for a brief second, dull and unfocused, before closing again. It was enough to keep his hope alive. The little ginger stranger had survived its first night. The next few days unfolded in a rhythm of cautious care and quiet observation. Arthur moved around his house with a new softness, his steps measured, his voice low. The small ginger cat remained largely unresponsive, curled in the towel-lined box, conserving what little energy it possessed. Arthur continued his routine, offering water with the eyedropper, gently cleaning the matted fur, attempting to entice it with the watered-down kibble, and later, tiny morsels of boiled chicken he prepared specially. Progress was agonizingly slow, measured in fractions. A slightly stronger flick of the tongue for water, a brief, weak attempt to lift its head. A moment when its eyes opened and seemed, for a fleeting second, to focus on Arthur's face before closing again in exhaustion. Each tiny improvement felt like a monumental victory against the odds. Arthur found himself talking to the cat constantly, narrating his actions, sharing anecdotes from his teaching days, or simply offering words of encouragement. "Come on now, little fighter. You can do it. Just a little more strength." He decided during one of these one-sided conversations that the cat needed a name. He looked at its fur, which, beneath the remaining grime, held the warm, vibrant hue of the desert sunset. "Ginger," he said softly, "like the spice, like the color of the rocks out there, ginger suits you." The cat didn't react, but saying the name felt right, grounding the small creature's presence in his home. Slowly, painstakingly, Ginger began to turn a corner. One morning, Arthur found the water dish slightly disturbed, a few drops spilled. Ginger had managed to drink on its own. A day later, a tiny portion of the mashed chicken was gone. Arthur felt a surge of relief so profound it almost brought tears to his eyes. He sat near the box, watching as Ginger, with trembling legs, managed to stand for a few seconds, swaying slightly before collapsing back onto the soft towels. The recovery accelerated. Ginger started grooming itself, tentative licks that gradually became more thorough, restoring some semblance of order to its neglected coat. It began to explore the immediate vicinity of the box, sniffing cautiously at the legs of the armchair, the edge of the rug. Its movements were still weak and uncertain, but the spark of curiosity was returning. Its eyes, now clear and a striking shade of amber, began to follow Arthur as he moved around the room. One afternoon, as Arthur sat reading in his armchair, he felt a hesitant touch against his leg. He looked down. Ginger stood there, looking up at him, and let out a tiny, rusty-sounding meow. It was the first sound Arthur had heard it make. He reached down slowly, letting Ginger sniff his hand before gently stroking its head. A low, rumbling purr started, weak at first, then gaining strength, vibrating through the small body. It was a sound of pure contentment, a declaration of trust that resonated deep within Arthur's quiet life. From that moment, the bond solidified. Ginger began to follow Arthur from room to room, a small orange shadow padding silently behind him. It would curl up near his feet while he read, or sit on the windowsill watching birds at the feeder, its tail twitching occasionally. It discovered the simple joy of a warm patch of sunlight on the porch floor, stretching languidly. Arthur adapted his routines. He bought proper cat food, scratching posts, a comfortable bed, though Ginger often preferred the armchair or Arthur's own lap. He learned Ginger's preferences, a particular fondness for chicken, a dislike of sudden noises, a deep appreciation for gentle ear scratches. When Ginger seemed strong enough, Arthur started taking it outside onto the enclosed porch. Ginger was initially hesitant, sniffing the air warily, ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. But soon, curiosity overcame caution. It explored the potted plants, batted tentatively at a dangling wind chime, and discovered the pleasure of watching insects buzz by. Arthur hadn't returned to his long desert hikes since finding Ginger. His mornings were now spent closer to home, tending to his small garden or sitting on the porch with Ginger nearby. He missed the trails, the vastness, the solitude, but the companionship he'd found was a different kind of solace, warmer, more immediate. One morning, as Arthur was watering his tomato plants just outside the porch enclosure, Ginger watched intently from behind the screen. Seeing Arthur step further into the yard, Ginger let out a plaintive meow. Arthur smiled. "Want to come out, little one?" He fetched a lightweight cat harness and leash he'd bought on a whim, unsure if Ginger would tolerate it. To his surprise, after a few initial moments of confusion and awkward steps, Ginger seemed to accept the constraint, associating it with the adventure of exploring the yard. They took short walks around the perimeter of the house, Ginger sniffing eagerly at unfamiliar scents, occasionally startled by a gust of wind or a passing car. These short excursions gradually grew longer. They ventured down the quiet street, Ginger sometimes walking confidently, sometimes needing to be carried when it felt overwhelmed. Arthur found himself seeing his familiar surroundings through new eyes, noticing things at Ginger's level, interest in weeds, scurrying beetles, the texture of different surfaces under paw. Eventually, Arthur felt Ginger was ready for a true return to the wild, albeit a carefully managed one. He chose a familiar, relatively flat trail near the edge of town, one he knew had plenty of shade spots. He packed extra water, Ginger's food, and a small blanket, along with his own usual supplies. He put Ginger in a comfortable pet carrier backpack for the initial part of the walk. When they reached a quiet, shaded spot under the large cottonwood tree near a dry creek bed, Arthur let Ginger out on the harness and long leash. Ginger emerged cautiously, sniffing the air, ears alert, the scents, the sounds, the vast open space. It was a world away from the confines of the house and yard. After a few minutes of acclimatization, a spark seemed to ignite. Ginger darted forward, exploring a patch of dry grass, batting at a wind-blown leaf, stalking an imaginary foe behind a rock. Arthur sat on a smooth boulder, watching. Ginger would explore, then run back to Arthur, rubbing against his legs before darting off again. It stayed within the radius of the leash, but its movements were filled with a newfound energy, a joy that was palpable. Arthur felt a corresponding lightness in his own chest. Their hikes became a new routine, not the long, solitary treks of before, but shorter, shared explorations. Arthur would carry Ginger in the backpack over rougher terrain, or when the cat tired, letting it out to explore in safe, interesting spots. Ginger learned to wait patiently under a shady bush while Arthur paused to admire a view, its amber eyes watching him. They developed their own silent communication, a specific meow from Ginger indicating thirst, a gentle tug on the leash from Arthur signaling it was time to move on. Arthur found himself talking more on these walks, sharing observations about the plants, the rocks, the history embedded in the landscape, just as he had when he was alone, but now directed at the attentive feline companion trotting beside him or nestled in the backpack. Ginger, in turn, seemed to listen, occasionally blinking slowly or offering a soft meow in response. Life settled into this new, comfortable pattern. The quiet house was no longer silent. It was filled with the soft patting of paws, the occasional meow, the contented purr. Arthur's loneliness, though never entirely gone, was significantly eased by the constant warm presence of Ginger. The cat, rescued from the brink, seemed to bloom in the safety and affection of Arthur's care. Its coat grew thick and glossy. Its movements became confident and playful. Yet, sometimes, watching Ginger sleep peacefully in a patch of sun, Arthur would feel a faint tremor of unease. He remembered how fragile Ginger had been, the harshness of the desert it had somehow survived. He saw the slight graying around Ginger's muzzle, a subtle sign of age that perhaps predated their meeting. He was 70. Ginger, by the vet's estimation based on teeth and general condition upon rescue, was likely already a mature cat, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, maybe more. Their time together, born from a chance encounter in the vast wilderness, felt precious, perhaps finite. He pushed the thoughts away, focusing instead on the gentle rise and fall of Ginger's breathing, the comforting weight of its presence in his quiet life. The desert had given him an unexpected gift, and he would cherish every moment. Several years passed, marked by the slow, steady rhythm of changing seasons across the Utah landscape. Arthur and Ginger settled deeper into their shared existence, their routines becoming as familiar and comfortable as Arthur's favorite armchair. The morning hikes continued, though perhaps a little shorter now, Arthur's own pace having slowed subtly with age, and Ginger seeming content with less ambitious explorations. Ginger remained Arthur's shadow, a constant warm presence, whether padding beside him on the trail, dozing on the desk as he read, or curled on his lap during the quiet evenings. The bond between them was unspoken, profound, a silent testament to their mutual rescue, Arthur saving Ginger from the desert, and Ginger saving Arthur from the deeper wilderness of solitude. Arthur treasured their companionship. He found himself anticipating Ginger's soft meow greeting in the morning, the feel of its fur rubbing against his ankles as he prepared breakfast, the comforting weight on his lap as he watched the evening news. Ginger had quirks Arthur had come to adore. The way it chased sunbeams across the floor with comical intensity, its fussy insistence on drinking only fresh water directly from the faucet, the soft, chirruping sound it made when spotting a bird outside the window. But time, as Arthur knew from his history lessons and his own life experience, is relentless. The first hint that something was amiss was subtle, easily dismissed. Ginger started drinking more water. Arthur noticed he was refilling the water bowl more often, sometimes finding Ginger lapping persistently at the dish or trying to sneak drinks from the bathroom sink. He initially attributed it to the dry desert air, or perhaps a change in the cat food. Then came other small changes. Ginger seemed slightly less enthusiastic about playtime, tiring more quickly when chasing the feather wand. Its appetite, usually robust, became pickier. Some days, Ginger would eat eagerly. Others, it would merely sniff at the offered food and walk away. Arthur started noticing Ginger sleeping more, often in secluded, quiet spots rather than its usual haunts near Arthur. A nagging worry began to coalesce in Arthur's mind. He tried to reassure himself. Cats slept a lot. Appetites could fluctuate. But the increased thirst was persistent. He found himself watching Ginger more closely, scrutinizing its movements, its breathing, its litter box habits. He noticed Ginger seemed to be losing a little weight, the sleekness of its coat diminishing slightly, feeling less dense beneath his touch. The unease solidified into genuine concern one morning when Arthur found a small pool of vomit on the rug. It wasn't hairball related, it was mostly liquid. It happened again a few days later. Arthur knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. He made an appointment with Dr. Ramirez, the local veterinarian, a kind woman whose calm demeanor Arthur appreciated. Putting a distressed Ginger into the carrier was always an ordeal, but Arthur managed it with gentle words and patient maneuvering. The drive to the clinic was filled with Ginger's anxious meows and Arthur's own quiet apprehension. Dr. Ramirez greeted them warmly, but her expression became serious as Arthur described Ginger's symptoms. The increased thirst and urination, the fluctuating appetite, the vomiting, the subtle weight loss, the lethargy. These symptoms, especially the increased thirst and urination in a mature cat, often point towards a few possibilities, Arthur. Dr. Ramirez explained gently, after a thorough examination. Kidney disease is common in older cats. It could also be diabetes or hyperthyroidism. We'll need to run some blood tests and a urinalysis to get a clearer picture. Arthur nodded, his heart heavy. He stroked Ginger, who was huddled on the examination table, looking small and vulnerable. "Do whatever you need to do, doctor." The wait for the test results felt interminable. Arthur tried to maintain their normal routine, but an undercurrent of anxiety permeated everything. He watched Ginger constantly, his worry amplifying every quiet nap, every ignored meal. When the phone rang a few days later, his stomach tightened. Dr. Ramirez delivered the news with compassionate directness. "Arthur, the tests confirm it. Ginger has chronic kidney disease. It's fairly advanced, stage 3 based on the levels." Arthur sank into a kitchen chair, the phone pressed hard against his ear. "Kidney disease," he repeated numbly. What does that mean exactly?" "It means Ginger's kidneys aren't functioning as well as they should," Dr. Ramirez explained patiently. "They're not filtering waste products from the blood efficiently. This is progressive, Arthur, meaning it will likely worsen over time. There's no cure, unfortunately, but there's a lot we can do to manage it, to keep Ginger comfortable and maintain a good quality of life for as long as possible." She outlined the treatment plan, a special prescription diet low in phosphorus and protein to reduce the kidney's workload, medication to manage potential complications like high blood pressure or nausea, and possibly subcutaneous fluids administered at home to help with hydration and flushing toxins if Ginger became dehydrated. Arthur listened intently, scribbling notes, asking questions. The technical details blurred slightly, but the core message was clear. This was serious, long-term, and life-limiting. He felt a wave of sadness wash over him, mixed with a fierce determination. "Whatever Ginger needs, doctor, we'll do it." Life changed again. Arthur meticulously measured out portions of the special kidney diet food, coaxing Ginger to eat it, sometimes having to mix it with a tiny bit of tuna juice or warm water to make it more appealing. He learned to administer the small pill for nausea, hiding it in a soft treat. The hikes became shorter, gentler strolls, often with Ginger riding comfortably in the carrier for most of the way, only getting out for brief sniffs in shady spots. Soon, Dr. Ramirez determined Ginger would benefit from subcutaneous fluids. The idea initially terrified Arthur, sticking a needle under his beloved cat's skin, but Dr. Ramirez and her technician patiently showed him how, guiding his hands, reassuring him. The first few times were nerve-wracking. Ginger flinched and Arthur's hands trembled, but they soon fell into a routine. Arthur would warm the fluid bag slightly, hang it from a kitchen cabinet handle, and settle Ginger gently on a towel on his lap. He'd find the loose skin between the shoulder blades, pinch it gently, and slide the needle in swiftly. Ginger, perhaps sensing Arthur's calm resolve, learned to tolerate the procedure with remarkable patience, often purring softly as the fluid slowly dripped in, plumping the skin temporarily. Arthur would talk to Ginger throughout, praising its bravery, telling its stories. This quiet ritual, performed every other day, became another intimate part of their shared life, a tangible act of love and care against the encroaching illness. There were good days and bad days. On good days, Ginger would seem almost like its old self, batting at a dust mote, following Arthur around, even managing a short, energetic burst across the living room. Arthur cherished these moments, storing them away like precious treasures. On bad days, Ginger would be listless, refusing food, vomiting despite the medication, retreating to a quiet corner under the bed. On those days, Arthur's heart ached. He would sit quietly near Ginger's hiding spot, speaking softly, just letting Ginger know he was there. He watched Ginger closely, learning the subtle signs of discomfort or nausea. He adjusted medications with Dr. Ramirez's guidance, tried different formulations of the kidney diet, sought new ways to keep Ginger hydrated and comfortable. His life revolved around Ginger's needs, his walks timed around medication schedules, his errands planned to ensure he wasn't away for too long. The history books on his shelves gathered a thin layer of dust. He knew intellectually that chronic kidney disease was a progressive condition. He knew Ginger wouldn't get better. But emotionally, he fought against the inevitable, pouring all his energy into managing the illness, into extending their time together. He saw the gradual, inexorable decline, the further weight loss, the dulling of the once bright Ginger coat, the increasing frequency of bad days. Ginger slept more and more, conserving its dwindling energy. The playful spark flickered less often. Sometimes, sitting quietly with Ginger curled weakly on his lap, Arthur's mind would drift back to that morning in the desert, the impossible fragility of the creature he'd found. He had saved Ginger then, pulled it back from the brink. Now he was fighting a different kind of battle, one against time and biology, a battle he knew, deep down, he couldn't win. The shadow of loss, once a fleeting thought, now loomed larger, casting a poignant hue over their remaining days together. He held Ginger closer, stroking the thinning fur, whispering promises of comfort, his love a fierce, quiet shield against the encroaching dark. The final autumn arrived with a blaze of glory in the canyons, the cottonwoods turning brilliant yellow against the red rocks, but Arthur barely registered the seasonal shift. His world had narrowed to the confines of his small house and the needs of his ailing companion. Ginger's decline, once gradual, had steepened. The good days became rare, fleeting moments sandwiched between long stretches of lethargy and discomfort. The prescription food was mostly ignored now, despite Arthur's increasingly desperate attempts to make it palatable. He tried warming it, adding broth, offering baby food, anything to get some calories into the frail body. The subcutaneous fluid sessions, once a manageable routine, became more difficult. Ginger's skin was thinner, dehydration a constant battle, and sometimes the cat would cry out weakly when the needle went in, a sound that pierced Arthur's heart. Ginger spent most of its time sleeping, often in Arthur's lap or curled tightly in its bed, seeking warmth and security. The bright amber eyes, once so full of curiosity and life, were often clouded, half closed. Its breathing was shallow, sometimes punctuated by a faint wheeze. The once glossy ginger fur was dull and sparse, clinging loosely to a body that felt fragile, brittle beneath Arthur's gentle touch. Arthur rarely left the house now, except for quick trips to the grocery store or the vet for more supplies. The hiking boots sat untouched by the door. His own needs felt secondary, unimportant. Sleep came in short, anxious bursts, often interrupted by the need to check on Ginger, to offer water with the dropper, to clean up small messes, or simply to sit beside the sleeping cat, his hand resting lightly on its frail side, feeling the faint rise and fall of its chest. Dr. Ramirez was kind but honest during their increasingly frequent phone calls and visits. "We're doing everything we can for comfort, Arthur," she said softly during one visit after examining the listless cat on the table. "But the disease is progressing. The kidney values are very high. We need to start thinking about his quality of life." Arthur understood the unspoken question hanging in the air. The question of when care becomes prolonging suffering. The thought was agonizing. How could he make that decision for the creature who had become the center of his world? The cat who had filled his silent house with soft purrs and unexpected joy? He brought Ginger home, wrapped carefully in a soft blanket. That evening, Ginger refused water entirely, even from the dropper. It lay on Arthur's lap, seemingly too weak to even lift its head. Arthur sat motionless in his armchair for hours, the reading lamp casting a soft glow, the only sound the quiet, shallow breaths from the small form nestled against him. He stroked Ginger gently, endlessly, murmuring memories. "Remember that first day, little fellow? So small, so dusty, out there all alone. Remember the sunbeams on the porch, chasing those silly dust motes? Our walks, waiting for me under the juniper tree." His voice was thick with unshed tears. He spoke of Eleanor, of his teaching days, of the quiet years before Ginger arrived, pouring out his heart to the small fading life in his arms. Sometime deep in the night, Ginger stirred faintly. It shifted slightly, pushing its head weakly against Arthur's hand. A tiny, almost inaudible sigh escaped its lips. Then it was still. The shallow breathing ceased. The faint warmth began to fade. Arthur sat there in the profound silence, the weight on his lap suddenly unbearable. He knew Ginger was gone. The tears he had held back for so long finally broke free, silent sobs shaking his shoulders in the dim light. He held Ginger close, rocking gently, mourning the loss of his companion, his shadow, his friend. The silence of the house pressed in on him, immense and absolute, echoing the vast emptiness he felt inside. He didn't know how long he sat there, holding the small, still body. Eventually, the first pale hints of dawn began to filter through the window. With trembling hands, Arthur gently wrapped Ginger in its favorite soft blanket. He couldn't bear the thought of a cold, clinical disposal. Ginger deserved better. He took a small shovel from the garage. Behind the house, near a sturdy old sagebrush that Ginger had sometimes liked to nap under, Arthur began to dig. The physical exertion was a strange counterpoint to the emotional numbness that enveloped him. The cool morning air felt sharp against his tear-streaked face. He dug carefully, respectfully, creating a small, neat resting place. He gently laid the blanket-wrapped bundle in the earth. He stood for a long moment, looking down, memories flooding his mind. The rescue, the recovery, the shared routines, the quiet companionship, the final, peaceful passing. "Thank you, Ginger," he whispered, his voice raw. "Thank you for finding me." He slowly filled the grave, patting the earth down gently. He found a smooth, flat piece of sandstone nearby and placed it as a simple marker. No name, no dates, just a silent testament to the small life that had burned so brightly, so briefly, in his own. The days that followed were hollow. The silence in the house was deafening. Arthur moved through the motions of living, making coffee he barely drank, staring blankly at the television, tidying rooms that felt achingly empty. Everywhere he looked, he saw reminders: the empty food bowl, the scratching post untouched, the indentation on the armchair cushion where Ginger used to sleep. He automatically reached down to pet a phantom presence at his ankles, his hand meeting only air. The ache of absence was constant, sharp. He tried to read, but the words blurred. He tried to go for a walk, driving to one of their familiar trailheads, but stepping out of the car, the silence of the desert felt different now. Not peaceful, but desolate. He saw the spot under the juniper tree where Ginger used to wait and turned back, unable to bear it. Grief was a heavy cloak. He knew logically that Ginger had been old, sick, that its suffering was over. He knew he had given the cat a loving home, years of comfort it wouldn't have otherwise had. But the knowledge did little to ease the profound sense of loss. He felt adrift, the anchor of his daily routine gone. Weeks turned into a month. The sharp edges of grief began to soften slightly, replaced by a pervasive melancholy. One crisp afternoon, feeling restless, Arthur found himself drawn back to the trail where he had first found Ginger. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning the ground, almost expecting to see that small patch of orange near the creosote bush. He reached the spot, marked only by his memory. He sat on a rock, the silence wrapping around him. He didn't feel the desolation of his previous attempt. Instead, sitting there, he felt a connection, a quiet understanding. He remembered the desperation of that morning, the immediate surge of compassion, the unexpected turn his life had taken. He thought about Ginger's journey, from near death in the wilderness to years of warmth and affection, leaving paw prints not just on the desert dust, but deep within Arthur's heart. Their time together had been a gift, an unexpected grace note in the quiet symphony of his later years. The sadness was still there, deep and resonant, but intertwined with it now was gratitude. Gratitude for the companionship, for the purpose Ginger had given him, for the love shared between a lonely man and a rescued cat. He wouldn't forget Ginger. The silence in the house would likely never feel entirely normal again. But as he sat there, watching the late afternoon sun paint the red rocks in familiar, beloved hues, Arthur felt a flicker of acceptance. Loss was the price of love, a truth as old as the stones around him. And the love he had shared with Ginger, brief though it was in the grand sweep of time, had been real, profound, and utterly worth the pain of its ending. He stood up, brushed the dust from his trousers, and slowly began the walk back home, carrying the memory of his little Ginger companion not as a burden, but as a quiet, enduring light within the solitude.